I know about a week ago we mentioned that the president had, spent some time in quarantine because he caught COVID, but I did see this week that Senator Harris's team unfortunately has had to take similar measures because someone on their team who was close to the senator got COVID-19 as well. And I'm curious, do you think this will change the campaign style of the senator and her team?
It's an interesting question, Jeremy, and I think it's one that I'd love to pose back to you as a former staffer of Senator Harris's. From my standpoint, it does. You have Senator Harris, who has been the most visible surrogate for the Biden ticket, who's actually been out on the ground in these local states. And while you may argue that her crowd size has been small, at the end of the day, when you're on the ground in these swing states, it's the media who you're speaking to, who are then reaching the homes of the voters you are trying to attract. And this takes her out of that. And you're unable to really harness that audience if you're virtually. It's hard to get in front of the local media when you're not sitting in their state, not to mention the fact that you now have the president back on the trail who has the objective to eat up as much airtime as he can. And you're seeing that this week. Look at his schedule. Look at the targeted states that he's been to visit and the amount of airtime he is giving to the pool and consuming. And so, what does that do for the Biden Harris ticket, especially when you have the top of the ticket who's largely spent most of his time behind closed doors in hiding, and their biggest vocal supporter out there, Senator Harris, she's unable to do that anymore. Is she as effective? And how does that play out when it comes to reaching that local audience?
For sure. I think you make a great point, Lindsay. Getting the attention of local media by being in that space is critical for campaigns at this phase. And I think a lot of our clients would do well to understand that despite the fact that the election looks like it's a national endeavor, that local media is critical to try and sway some of those swing voters in those key states. But when it comes to campaigning and Senator Harris here, the Republicans and Democratic tickets have had a diverse almost night and day campaign strategy. The president has wanted to fire up crowds in a space that he does well, while the Democrats have really tried to remind Americans that COVID-19 is a real threat, and we're trying to be careful on top of that. I do think not having Harris in those key states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, in Nevada, for example, is going to hurt the campaign because she is one of the biggest superstars of the Democratic Party. But I think when it comes to swaying voters and those who might be watching from a little bit of a distance, it might not have as big as an impact as we would think. I argued, last week that Trump being off the trail would have a big impact because he is this larger than life figure who attracts people to events week after week after week. Well, I think, as you said, Kamala Harris isn't attracting, tens of thousands of people into one place. When looking at the work she was doing last week, there were like 17 people spread out in a large field around them. And so I think optically it will not change much, but it has to be tough for everyone in that campaign today, and especially the two people who do have COVID. So, of course, we hope that they have a speedy recovery and that she's able to stay safe as we go into the last 2 weeks of the campaign.
Yeah, and Jeremy, before we jump off of this topic, I think it's important to note as well the fact that it takes some wind out of the sails of the Democrats' argument. When the president came down with COVID, while everyone was wishing, most people were wishing him speedy and safe recovery, there definitely was a lot of conversation around the fact that the president, in their minds, had been reckless. He was holding events that were super spreaders. He is out on the trail. And yet now you have on the flip side a campaign who has been largely conservative. To your point, how many individuals were at the event last week, and yet somehow two of those staffers have contracted COVID-19. It makes it a little bit harder to go after the president and his team for what you believe is their reckless behavior when now you're facing it at home. And as you said, it couldn't echo it more. We hope that both of those staffers have a speedy and healthy recovery and are able to get back out on the trail and that no one else is impacted. But it is definitely something to look at when you now have two of the four leading actors in this election cycle who have now been personally impacted.
Yeah, it goes to show COVID is just as dangerous as they say they were, as it is. It's